Raised in a unsafe home. My folks owned what we'd call a biker bar. It was really a drug-infested, a rough place. And that's the crowd I grew up in. And I had friends that were witnessing to me. I had just people that were planting the seed, and someone else would come by and water the seed. Just little works here and there of God doing a work in my heart. And I knew that God was drawing me. It's really interesting. I always knew the Lord was doing something in my life. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what was going on. And well, one thing that I knew from the beginning, and I don't know where this came from, but I knew that if I were to be saved, if I were to trust Christ, if I were to surrender my life to the Lord, that this was a full-time thing, that this was, the way I say it, is 8 days a week, or 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, 366 days a year, that this wasn't a part-time thing. And so I wrestled with that. I looked at the fun of the world, and I looked at living the Christian life, and I didn't really know what all that entailed, but I just knew it was going to be a full-time thing. And that it meant that I would be following the Lord in some type of ministry. I didn't even know what ministry was. I had no idea. I'd never been in a Bible preaching church in my life, but I knew it was something full-time. I was in high school, and God was just straining my heart, working on me through friends' witness, through Bible studies. And I was at this party. It was this big outdoor event and a lot of alcohol, and I was sitting on this picnic table. And it had rained. It's really interesting. It had rained earlier that evening, just one of these downpours, and so there was little mud puddles and whatnot all over. And at this party, kids were playing in the mud, and it became just this big mud fest kind of thing. And off on the side was this biker group. I mean, they had their colors on, and they were the typical bearded, rough group, and they were off on the side. And I'm sitting there with a couple of my friends, and I had a beer in my hand, but I wasn't drinking. I was just kind of being part of the crowd. And I remember just sitting there weighing this life and looking at all this and saying, this is not what I want. This is not what I want. But yet it's what I wanted. It was the fun that I wanted. And a couple of guys broke off from this biker group and started making their way toward us. And there was one guy who was just stone drunk. And two guys had his arms on their shoulders, and they were carrying him along. And they're stumbling around and bringing the guy to the parking lot or something. I don't know what they were doing fully. Dragging this guy along, and at one point, he slipped from their arms and he fell in the mud. I mean, face down in the mud. Not in the water, but in the mud. And he came up, and his beard was caked to his face, and he was just a mess. And I was sitting there looking at this, and I had been in this setting for since I was a little kid, in the midst of that type of crowd. And I just remember looking at saying, I was just disgusted. I was disgusted with that lifestyle. And I was saying, I don't want to be a part of that. And as they picked this guy back up, and they're carrying him, and actually they turned and they started making their way right past me within feet of where I was sitting on the end of a picnic table. And in my mind, I'm just beating this guy up and just saying, I remember my exact words, what a dirt ball. What a mess. What a lousy excuse for life. I remember going through all this. And as this group of three guys got right even with me, this man that they were carrying that had fallen in the mud, he looked up at me, and it was my dad. And I felt as if I was looking at myself. My dad didn't recognize me. He was thoroughly drunk, and they carried him off. And I set my drink down, and I got up and I walked away. And I said, okay, Lord, here we go. And threw myself into other Bible studies with people that I knew. I didn't know what salvation was. And determined, okay, I'm going to follow the Lord. I ended up in Bible college, of all places. And it was in sitting in Bible college that, in chapel every day, hearing the gospel, I realized that what I was clinging to was not salvation. And I cried out to the Lord, turned from sin and cried to Christ and looked to him for forgiveness and cleansing. And it's been all engines forward since then. I hold to Colossians 2:6. From day one I've used it as a theme verse. As you have therefore received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk ye in him. It's like, okay, now you get saved, let's go. Walk every day in him. I think of 1 Corinthians 15:58. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding. And I think of that always abounding as always going forward in the work of the Lord. And that's, so as I look back at what would I say that God used to draw me to that dividing line of putting this old life away and looking to walk with the Lord, it would have been that day that I saw myself in my father as I was in a park in that drunken mess that he was in. And the good news of all that is all these years later, my dad was 80 years old and he got saved. And just weeks before he passed away of cancer, he came to Christ. He had been a drug dealing, in that life his whole life. And right before he passed, he came to Christ. So that was the good news of it.